Insomniac's Spider-Man and its follow-up Miles Morales are, I think, rightfully regarded by many as among the best superhero games of all time. I mean, they do seem to have it all. You've got stylish combat, cinematic set-piece action, great story and characters that balance the high-stakes heroics and everyman-friendly neighborhood attitude that sets the character of Spider-Man apart. But perhaps most importantly of all, there's the web swinging. I mean, it's amazing, right? We'll dive into it, but first, I just want to take a moment to thank you for stopping by to check out this video. I'd love to hear your ideas in the comments for what you'd like to see in the upcoming game, whether that's powers, suits, or anything else. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to drop a like and subscribe if you haven't already. I do really appreciate it. So let's talk about the web swinging. Yeah, it's great, it's fun, it's easy to learn, it looks fantastic, and it certainly goes a long way to fulfilling the fantasy of being the wall-crawling web slinger. So you'd be right to ask, what's the point in this video in the first place? What's wrong with the web swinging? How can something that's this good be improved? And that's actually how we arrive at the web swinging's biggest problem in the first place. It's designed to look good, but not necessarily to feel good, in my opinion. Many people have argued that at its most basic, it's an almost on-rails experience and the game holds your hand a lot. It can feel very restrictive, as though the game's designed to make you play in a very specific way with little room for actual player expression. So how can this be resolved? How can Insomniac improve on their traversal mechanics to create a system that has both the stunning animation quality of the first two games while also giving the player more freedom? Well, as it turns out, I think in order for Insomniac's web swinging to move forward, we need to look backwards and look at what came before. The future of web swinging and Spider-Man's traversal lies in a blend of the past and the present. So let's go back to where it all began, which also happens to be Spider-Man 2. I was 11 when this game came out, so yeah, I'm getting on a little bit. I can't tell you how many hours I sunk into it, and that's after I finished the story and all the side activities. This was a game that you could play purely because of just how much fun it was to swing around. There was nothing like it before. Previously, Spider-Man swung from the clouds in preset canned animations. Spider-Man 2 was a complete revelation. You could hold onto a web as long as you wanted. Webs connected to surfaces if you swung around a corner. You can swing on two webs at the same time. Then came Ultimate Spider-Man, allowing you to climb up your webs to increase height. Spider-Man 3 let you slingshot, and Web of Shadows allowed you to slide across any surface. It seemed like web swinging was only going to get better and better. Oh, never mind. Alright, that's actually not completely fair. It might surprise you that there is quite a lot that I think Insomniac should take from the Beanox Amazing Spider-Man games too, but most of it isn't necessarily web swinging related, so we will come back to that later. As I was saying, between 2004 and 2008, things were looking great when it came to web swinging. It seemed like there was no way things could go backwards until they did. And then came Marvel's Spider-Man, which seemed like it was going to right all the wrongs of the Amazing Spider-Man series, and for the most part it did. Webs attached to buildings again, and there was a sense of speed and style. The problems really start to appear when you start looking closer. Spider-Man starts his swinging animation before a web even connects to a surface. It's not truly physics, it is a canned animation. You can't swing low enough to touch the ground, there's an invisible barrier that stops you. Like I said, it's as though the game wants to hold your hand and stop you from screwing up, but it leans so far into that you feel like you aren't really in control, and your contribution is basically just holding R2. You can't even decide how long you hold onto a web. It looks stunning when it's working as intended, but as Whitelight said in his video on the same subject, how long can you do this before it gets old? His video is excellent, by the way, and I really recommend checking it out. It inspired many of the points on this video, and I'll leave a link in the description. Basically, if you've played the older Spider-Man games and the new ones, I feel like you already kind of know what I'm talking about, so I'm not going to waste any more time explaining it to you. Now, we need to talk about solutions. This video isn't just about what older Spider-Man games did well and what Insomniac's games are lacking. I really want to dig into how Insomniac could solve these problems beyond just saying, just do what the other games did. That's easier said than done, and Insomniac have their own design philosophy, which I still want to respect. Realistically, I can't see Insomniac completely changing their engine to work around full physics-based swinging. In fact, we already know that's not happening from the Spider-Man 2 footage, which does look excellent, by the way. So what can we expect? What can Insomniac do using their own system of traversal to give the player more options, more freedom and more expression? Well, we've already kind of been shown the answer. and that is more mechanics. We already know what two of them are: slingshot launch and web wings. The more mechanics a player has at their disposal, the more things in the world that they can interact with and engage with in different ways, the more freedom you ultimately have. Is it the same kind of freedom as the original Spider-Man 2 had? Not necessarily, but it could help find that balance between how damn good Insomniac swinging looks and how free the older Traversal felt. So let's go over mechanics Insomniac could use. Firstly, the most basic one is more variety with the web tunnel feature. In the first game we had water towers, decking, pipes, Christmas wreaths in the Miles Morales game, but what if some buildings had open windows where you could run through to the other side, in Assassin's Creed 3 for example? We kind of see something a little bit like this in Miles Morales during the Rhino chase, and in the very first trailer for the first Spider-Man game, there's a small scene where he seems to be doing parkour through a cafe. And then there's also the helicopter chase in the first game as well, where Peter runs through a burning building. Now imagine if there were building pass-throughs just scattered around the environment like this. The web tunnel mechanic could also work under things like bridges and through any small gaps. Next, there's wall boosting. To be honest, it doesn't really feel like it makes a huge difference in the original games, so its effect could be increased, but what about also giving us an alternate way to use it? Currently when you're running up a wall, you tap X to boost yourself up, but how about if you hold X, Spider-Man plants himself into the wall and creates a slingshot like this. You start out stationary, but then in return you get a massive boost to your initial speed and height. Most importantly though, it just looks awesome. Something that players have found a little disappointing is that Insomniac don't allow you to loop-de-loop around cranes or poles. This is partially due to the fact that you have no control about when you can let go of your web, and also the game just doesn't seem to be designed with that in mind, because the physics is so controlled. So in that case, why not make the loop a canned animation mechanic? I feel like we had a tease of what this could look like in the Miles Morales game. So imagine when swinging from any kind of pole structure or crane, you get a prompt to hold right trigger and X, and doing so will cause you to enter the loop-de-loop animation. The longer you hold it, the more powerful the boost. Next, we have to shout out some of the things that the Amazing Spider-Man series actually did pretty well when it comes to swinging and traversal. You could slingshot from almost anywhere, and their version of the point launch had extra animations that interacted with other parts of the environment. For example, Spider-Man might run along the top of a bus or swing around a pole. Again, we see something that looks like this in a cutscene from the 2018 game, but technically in The Amazing Spider-Man 1, you can actually do that. So bringing back those extra contextual animations for point launching with Insomniac's signature flair would potentially look really awesome. I think the Amazing Spider-Man games leaned too far into this mechanic, but if you found the right balance, it would be perfect. They also had some really nice touches when you reach the top of a wall when crawling, where Spider-Man does a little handstand maneuver. It might not seem very important, but it's a nice detail and just adds a little bit of extra style. So that's the swinging mechanics, but what about parkour and running? I don't know about anyone else, but I personally like to make movement look as stylish as possible, and like to have as many options as possible. After all, Spider-Man can do a lot more than just swing. I love trying to implement rooftop parkour and diving from ledges and things like that. The problem is that swinging and parkour and sprinting feel like two completely separate entities rather than one system of traversal that flows together. This is mostly due to the fact that running itself is just very slow, and also the amount of momentum that's lost as soon as you hit the ground. If you don't choose to do the recovery jump, that's it, you're done. You're going to basically jog, which doesn't feel particularly superhuman. In the comics, Spider-Man's strength isn't just how much he can lift. He can run over 100 miles an hour due to the amount of force that he can generate. Now, I'm not saying that should be reflected in the game, because swinging is still king, but your momentum should carry over across all aspects of traversal. The only way I can really show this is by editing clips of the previous games. Here you can see what it looks like when you hit the ground and change from swinging to running. All the momentum is just gone. Now imagine if you could sprint and clear objects much faster and continue the flow of movement. You could see a rooftop and choose to land on it and then parkour over the obstacles and continue to swing on the other side, knowing that it's not going to slow you down, or at least nowhere near as much. We already know that players are aware that parkour speed and sprinting speed is an issue because there have been mods to address it on the PC version of the game. Great examples of how this could look visually are No Way Home's final swing. Spider-Man lands, rolls, and then uses his momentum to carry on across the rooftop before diving off the other side. Spider-Man 2, when Peter runs along the wall and then jumps off a flat surface. And then the Amazing Spider-Man 1, when Peter clears objects in an alleyway without losing any momentum and then even uses them to generate more. The prototype games are a great example of transferring from the air to the ground and clearing obstacles while still keeping the character's forward momentum. Another thing that feels like it restricts momentum is when you swing off a sign, like this. Why not use that as like a boost mechanic? It takes a fair bit of precision to accurately swing into these. Rather than feeling like they're slowing us down and an obstacle, use them to generate extra momentum. We've already kind of seen this with the pole swing that Miles Morales can do, so apply that design philosophy to other objects in the environment. And what about completely new parkour mechanics? The best one I could think of is a slide or grind. In the air, the L3 button is used to enter a dive, but it doesn't really serve any purpose on the ground or when you're on a wall. Why not make it a slide? Insomniac have a mechanic like this in Sunset Overdrive, and yet again we've seen a move like this in, you guessed it, a cutscene from the first game. Imagine you hit the ground and you can immediately enter a slide, continuing that flow of movement uninterrupted. You could even use it when running along a wall to quickly move downwards on a surface like in Web of Shadows. I can't believe I'm saying it, but the slide mechanic feels pretty good in Fortnite, especially when you combine it with the web swinging. There's also another gripe that I have with just momentum and movement in general. When you point launch to a vertical surface that isn't a dedicated launch spot like a pole, you seem to come to a dead stop. You should immediately be able to enter a wall run or the slide mechanic that I just mentioned. So do you see why increasing the level of canned mechanics opens up so much more possibility? You could do faster parkour over objects, into a super sprint, into a dive, swing into a wall, slide, zip around a corner, and then web tunnel through a building, loop the looper crane on the other side, straight into a web wing glide. The more mechanics you have at your disposal, the more you can find cool ways to combine them, and the more interesting and engaging the traversal is. I also just want to quickly address that weird safety net that I mentioned earlier that stops you swinging close to the ground. That's another way in which you're constricted in how you move. I'm bringing it up again, but even Fortnite manages to overcome this by letting you run or slide along a surface during your swing. Insomniac has a really cool animation in, you guessed it, a cutscene where Peter is millimeters from the ground. So have an animation like this when you're swinging low to the ground. Looks awesome. So that's it for the traversal overall. Let's talk about the car chases. Car chases have barely evolved in Spider-Man games in the past 20 years. More than almost any other combat aspect of the entire IP, they are the most in need of a shake-up, desperately. There's only so many times I can chase a car, press a button, and then press another button to complete the scenario. So how do we go about making it more interesting? Similar to improving the traversal, it's all about giving the player more options. Web of Shadows probably had the most options when it comes to how you deal with a car. Unlike most of the other games, they're not really a quick time event. They're an actual physical object in the world and basically treated as an enemy type. If you really want to, you can just swing kick the car right off the road, no cutscene required. It's awesome. And with the black suit, you could just straight up pick the car up and throw it 100 feet away. Man, I'm excited for the black suit in Spider-Man 2. Anyway, as I said earlier, I can't see Insomniac completely reinventing their wheel to make everything physics based. So we need a way to make the car chase mechanic more interesting. Let's break it down. Firstly, the Amazing Spider-Man games did use QuickTime events, but they had extremely badass animations for car chases. I mean, look at this. That's step 1. We need animations like this that increase that cinematic feeling. Step 2, we need something more engaging than just tapping a button. Even if it's still a QuickTime event, just change it up a little bit. The first 2 Insomniac games have this QuickTime event where you have to move the analog stick to the right spot before firing a web. Why not use something like that? Let's say, for example, you finish the chase and then you flip the car up into the air in slow motion, like in the Amazing Spider-Man game. And then you get the QuickTime event where you have to catch the car in the air with a web net. It looks a lot cooler and it's at least a little bit more interactive. But that still doesn't really solve the problem of the chases themselves just feeling boring. You just have to swing up to the car and press one button. So step 3 is increasing the chances of failure and the general difficulty of the chase. How about when you get hit and thrown from the car, Rather than being able to zip straight back to the car, you have to surf behind it like, can't believe I'm saying this again, but Fortnite. That's a whole new minigame in the car chase sequence, where you'd have to dodge obstacles and steer Spider-Man out the way, recover and go back to the car. That's the overall basics of the car chase scenario, but what else can we do which would not only affect car chases but improve the game overall? Well, the design philosophy of a Spider-Man game should be that whatever you can do it while moving. That's why it's a personal peeve of mine that you stop dead in your tracks when you fire a web. I understand why Insomniac does this, because shooting webs is a combat mechanic only and you don't use it for chases. But once again, to their credit, the Amazing Spider-Man games allowed you the freedom to shoot webs while flying through the air, and it was glorious. It created these really cinematic moments. And if you combine this with the car chase mechanic, Insomniac could make it so that you have to web up the gunmen while you're in the air before it's safe to attack the car. But then how would that work? Because if you now move through the air while using webs, won't that affect how the combat web works? Well, there is a solution. The newer games already allow you to aim to use the point launch, and for manual control on where you aim your gadgets in combat. But imagine if we could shoot webs on the move while we aim, and then the static web shot is when we don't aim. So you could be flying through the air over a car like this, slow down time, and then aim at the gunmen in the car and web them up, without stopping your momentum for a second. It's still accessible, the slow motion doesn't make it too difficult, but it looks really cool and just adds an extra layer to the chase. But this would have a knock-on effect on combat as well. If you want to flip through the air and shoot webs without stopping while in combat, you now have that option. You could shoot webs at them and land on the other side. So all of these mechanics play into each other. Finally, there's just a few honourable mentions for features that I'd like to see. We've already seen a new type of gadget, the web grabber. While Insomniac are borrowing from Just Cause with the web wings, they might as well use the tether mechanic as well. There's so many fun things you could do with this. If they wanted to add more physics into car chases, they could do that. You could flip a car up into the air using a tether and then catch it with the QuickTime event I mentioned earlier. Tether enemies together, you could tether objects to enemies. Just play Just Cause, you'll see exactly what I mean. I also had an idea for a web wall, a device that casts a net on a surface or between two surfaces, and it stays there for a short time and you can throw enemies into it to catch them. Or you could even cast it in the gap between two buildings, and if you throw an enemy off, they'll land in the net, which could look fun. Considering it would be a pretty powerful gadget, it would probably have a long cooldown and you could only use one at a time. You could even use something like this in the car chases as well. You could cast the net in front of a car and then the net catches the car. You get the idea. It was actually inspired by the Crystal Dynamics Spider-Man from Marvel's Avengers. One of the customizable skills with his abilities is that you can cover an area in webbing, and then when you throw an enemy into that surface, it catches them. You know, say what you want about that game, but it did have some fun ideas. I'd also really like to see dynamic suit damage return, but I can live without it. It would be great if we could explore Peter's house and maybe use it as like a sort of base of operations, kind of like Oxlab from the first game, but more personal, with memories of Peter's childhood we can find, for example. Just a nice detail. I really hope suit powers return from the first game, especially if we're getting outfits inspired by other Marvel characters. They did a great job with this with Iron Spider in the first game and how the arms worked. We know that we're getting the Moon Knight themed Arachnite skin, so imagine if the suit power is something like Web Blossom but with crescent moon blades. That would be pretty cool. I also had a thought about an Across the Spider-Verse Peter B. Parker suit that has Mayday with him, and she attacks enemies during takedowns like Spider-Man the Cat from Miles Morales. That would be awesome. And that about wraps it up. So even though this has been my longest video yet, I still feel like I've probably missed some of the things I wanted to go over. I'm sure we've only seen the tip of the iceberg for what Insomniac themselves probably have in store for us with Spider-Man 2. It's far too late for any of the ideas I've talked about to make it into the game if they haven't already thought of similar things themselves. But I have faith that even if it's not exactly the things I've talked about, we're going to see a ton of improvements either way. And on the off chance that someone at Insomniac is hearing this, well, there's always Spider-Man 3. If you made it to the end of the video, congratulations first of all, and once again, thank you. Just a reminder to drop a like, subscribe, don't forget to comment your own ideas. I'll try to respond to any comments. And let me know if you agree or disagree with any of my ideas, and I'll see you guys in the next video.